Hi everyone. Today I want to take you with me on the edit of the Wonderland Trail, the latest film on YouTube. I hiked the Wonderland Trail in last June in Washington State, and it's the trail that circles Mount Rainier. I'm currently in Chengdu in China on a transit from Nepal to Taiwan. My next flight is in less than 2 hours, so I'm going to keep it short today. Just show you a little bit of what this trail is about and a little bit about the edit. So the Wonderland Trail is the trail that circles Mount Rainier. It's about 100 miles, just short of 100 miles or 150 kilometers long. And the nice thing about this trail is that it is really accessible. So there are three major starting points, and at either of these starting points, you can do a food drop or anything. So what I did, I started at Longmire, and I just carried the food for the entire 5 days that it took me to circle it, and then I went clockwise to Mowick Lake, which is over here. It's another starting point. And then there are basically two options. The original Wonderland Trail goes through Spray Park, which is this section at a higher elevation. It's on the north side of the mountain, so it's usually covered in snow until late summer. So about 20 years ago, they decided to make an alternative that goes north of this through this valley where there's like no snow, which makes it more accessible in early season. I went for the Spray Park because it's way more scenic and I don't mind a little bit of snow. Then you continue all the way to Sunrise, which is another visitor center and starting point of the trek. Then you climb up to the highest point of the trek, which is the Panhandle Gap over here, also covered in snow until late summer. And then you descend back down, pass by Paradise, which is this area over here, back to Longmire. It is necessary to make reservations for all of the campsites. I was lucky that I was very early in the season, so I just went for a walk-up permit. I drove to Longmire to stop by a ranger station, and I asked for available permits. And basically everything was still available, so I could do my perfect itinerary in a sense. I have to say I'm not a huge fan of making reservations for campsites. It happened several times that I got to a campsite at like 3 p.m. in the afternoon, and if it weren't for the permit, I would have kept hiking until sunset if it was possible. But on the other hand, it was super relaxed knowing that you had a nice campsite at night and know what was still ahead of me. All of this route is inside of a national park, so I wasn't allowed to fly a drone. I did fly my drone outside of the national park, which is the drone shot that you see at the start of the film. I shot it with a Mavic 3 Pro with a 3x zoom, so it looks a little bit closer. So diving right into the edit, this is the final product of the Wonderland Trail. So you can see that the audio is just one big track now. So what I usually do is I merge all of the music and I merge the dialogue and the effects. I apply a separate channel EQ to get rid of some of that low frequency wind noise on the dialogue, and then I apply a very gentle limiter to the dialogue and the effects, which basically ensures that it's a little bit leveled. And then together with the music, again, a little limiter applied to that. I export everything and I import it into Adobe Audition, which allows me to normalize the whole track. So it applies a limiter and ensures that the levels are good for exporting. And that's a track that you see here. So that's the final audio track. So let's play through the film and let me see if I can give you some insights of my thinking process about this film. So at the start, I tried to create a nice hook for people clicking on the video on YouTube to make them interested in this film and to give a sort of a broader overview of what this video is about. Usually, I try to do it with drone shots, give like a nice cinematic overview. Since I didn't have any drone footage to work with this time, I opted just to give a sort of a more general overview of the track with what I think are a bunch of highlights of this track that make it very interesting to look at. I usually prefer not to use the same footage in the intro that I used throughout the film. It usually bothers me personally, seeing the same shot again later in the film. So what I did for this one, I just flipped every shot in the intro. So throughout the film, you will see it like this. What I did, I just flipped it horizontally, so I mirrored all of the shots, giving it the feeling that the footage is unique, even though it is the same footage that I use throughout the film. So this one, I'm walking in front of the logo, and the way I did this is I did a roto brush in Adobe After Effects of myself. I exported it as ProRes 4444, which supports alpha, so the transparent background, and I basically put it on top of the logo. So that's how you see me walking in front of the logo. I just heard last night that Apple launched Final Cut Pro 11, which also supports tracking of objects and cropping. So in the future, I probably don't have to do this in Adobe After Effects anymore. So for this film, I basically applied two major corrections. So we have the base correction for each clip. For this clip, it is very simple. I lift the highlights a little bit to make sure that the highlights are really touching the maximum for consistency. I lift the midtones a little bit to sort of pop the foreground, the grass a little bit, lower the shadows for more contrast. And what I usually do with the Panasonic footage is that I increase the highlights, the saturation, the highlights a little bit. But since I'm lifting the midtones, I tend to decrease the saturation in the midtones. And that's just a personal preference. I think the Panasonic footage is slightly oversaturated in the midtones. So I tend to decrease that a little bit. Then I apply a lot, which is a very subtle lot in this case. I use this one very often. It's a kind of a teal and orange vibe, but not exactly. It's more a reference to the old Kodak, which gives this more like warmer tint, and it saturates the blues a little bit more. And then I apply some final corrections, as I call it, which is basically just a correction that I usually do to make it better viewable on TVs. So my computer screen, my MacBook has a calibrated screen and has a much higher dynamic range than the average TV that people watch it on. So I usually just do the corrections that I think look good on my MacBook or on my external display. Then I watch it on TV, and I will always notice that the midtones are way too dark, that I'm losing a lot of details. And since most people will watch it on uncalibrated screens, I apply these final corrections that basically lift the shadows a little bit, and in this case, the highlights as well. I had a lot of fun editing this one. I've definitely been playing around a little bit. So for the intro shot, for example, I applied a little bit of dusting in front of it to make it look even more magical, like it's the pollen coming from the flowers or the trees in the morning. And for this shot here, for example, I applied my custom sun flare. So what you see in the film is not entirely true. I dramatized it a little bit to make it look even more dramatic. I hope this information doesn't spoil the magic for you. I think not only does it look more dramatic, it also matches better with the next shot, where you definitely see this lens flare of this aperture that is almost closed. So if I would have to say, this is probably one of the favorite routes that I've done, especially backpacking wise. I had blue skies for the entire 5, 6 days of my trek. Didn't see a single cloud. I just loved hiking here. I went like super ultra light. I didn't bring a full tent. Only had very little food to carry, little gear. So my pack weight was super low, and I just had a lot of fun just playing around in the snow, watching sunsets like this, and just cowboy camping every night, which was very special. Although I have to admit that the first night I kind of regretted not bringing a bug net or something. I was camped near this lake, and this lake was pretty warm, so there were a lot of mosquitoes. I went to bed and I just remember just being surrounded by mosquitoes that were just stinging me all the time. So I really wished I had brought a tent that night. The other nights weren't as bad, and I eventually got used to it. I just put in earplugs and just ignored the mosquitoes around me. But it was definitely worth it, in my opinion. So for this track, I also brought my little slider, which is one of the shots that you see here. It's only a 10-inch, 30 centimeter long slider, but it definitely adds a more dramatic effect to it. It was still pretty early in the season for like wildflowers, but I definitely saw a bunch of flowers, which was nice. I had this bear encounter on the second or third day. The bear was probably 30 meters, 100 feet away from me, but I was just in awe looking at the animal, and it did not seem to be bothered me being there. It probably had some human encounters before, so I just kept a safe distance, filmed it, and then I just went on with my track. So the Wonderland Trail usually has a bunch of bridges over these creeks, but it was early in the season, so a lot of these bridges were still down from winter snow, winter weather. But the rangers in the national park, they keep excellent track of all of the trail conditions. So at the start of my trek, I just went to the ranger station, and they have a full map of every section of the trail, showing what bridges are down and how much snow is still left on specific sections. So they know extremely well the conditions on the trail. So if you ever do this trek, make sure to stop by ranger stations for the current trail conditions. And what I really loved about this trek are these old growth forests that I've passed through several times. These are some massive pine trees that are sometimes up to 1,000 years old, and they've been completely untouched by humans. They've never been cut down, which makes it astonishing to look at. And the thing about the Wonderland Trail is that since you circle Mount Rainier, you also pass through every watershed that comes off the mountain, which means that you constantly go up and down through all these watersheds, these rivers, these creeks that have been carved out over time. So it's probably one of the most undulating trails I've ever done. There's not a flat section in it. It just constantly goes up or goes down. So you go in one watershed, next into the next one, etc. So I didn't actually stay at the national park inn. I just stayed at the campground. But since it's such a historic landmark, I wanted to include it. So I'm just pretending like I just came out of the national park inn. So for these slider shots, I actually have to walk back and forth twice. So the slider itself makes so much noise. I can probably show you the original one and just listen to the noise that the slider makes. So this noise makes it basically impossible to use the audio. So what I then usually do is then I walk the same section another time, but without the slider. And I use this audio. I match my steps with the previous one to get the final clip where you can see and hear me walk at the same time. So what you might also notice at this slider shot is that there's a lot of wobble in it. So I modified my slider. It used to be made of stainless steel. I completely took it apart, created new parts out of 3D sintered, so a sort of a 3D printing technique out of nylon, which really reduces the weight by like 40%. But it's still an early version. I still have to work on it, so it's not as stable as the version used to be. But what I just do in post is that I just stabilize it and I set it to tripod mode, which makes it focus on the background and makes it look super smooth. So it's definitely usable this way. So a lot of audio that you hear in the film with the bird sounds, they are through audio. So things that are definitely recorded on site, but it might not have been exactly at this moment. So just looking at this clip, there's a separate audio recording that I renamed as Bird. And this one too. Which creates this illusion that there are a lot of birds at this particular section. So another section I want to show you, or better to listen to, is me walking across a bridge. So what you can definitely hear of me walking across this bridge is the squeaking sound of all the metal and stuff. And like I said, I had a lot of fun working on this project, but I have to admit that the squeaking sounds are not real. So beneath the bridge is this rushing creek, and this rushing creek makes so much noise that basically the only thing you hear in the original audio, if I show it to you or let you listen to it real quick, is just water. So there's not much else that you can hear here than just the rushing water. So what I did for this one, I added some more sound effects, and I've been getting a little bit creative with this one. So the sounds you hear are actually not from a bridge at all. So we have some hoarse metal rains, we have some metal squeak close, and we have some metal change moving various. So a lot of these sound effects are already in Final Cut Pro. The other ones I downloaded recently or a long time ago. And if I just focus on these three sounds, this is what you will hear. So I think, in my opinion, that's one of the fun parts about video editing, is that you can create a certain illusion. So by looking at the footage and hearing these sounds, it makes total sense, at least to me, that the sounds that you hear are from the bridge. While in reality, it's just a bunch of other metal kind of sounds that create that illusion. So like I said, I definitely had a lot of fun working on this project, especially working with kind of these sound effects and stuff. You can create an entire new dimension to a video just by focusing on the sound. So for these two shots where you see me crossing this creek, these are actually two different creeks that I shot like 5 minutes apart. But by editing them together like this, I definitely give the illusion that it's the same creek. So skipping ahead a little bit to the first campsite, this is Clackachi Park. It's probably one of the most famous campsites in the on the Wonderland Trail, mostly for the sunsets, which are just stunning here. You can see the entire southwest side of the mountain with the reflections in the lake, which is just it's just gorgeous. So you might wonder, was I the only person here? No, there were two other guys at one campsite, and another campsite a little bit ahead. There was another guy that showed up later at night. Um, but I make it look like I'm alone, and it's definitely how it felt like when I was there. So the campsites are pretty far apart, so you don't really hear one another all the time. You see one another every now and then, but it really felt to me like I was the only one there, and that's also how I filmed it. So the other guys are somewhat to the right over here, so I did not really bother filming them. So skipping ahead to the second campsite at the South Mowick River. And since these campsites are so close to the river, there's a lot of noise from the river, and some people might find it calming. I personally don't usually like it, but I especially don't like it for recording, since the only thing you will hear when recording close to the river are just the sounds of water. So what I did for this scene is that at night I definitely focus more on the sounds of water. So you will hear the river on the background way more closely than the next morning, where I sort of lower all of the sounds of the river and sort of create a contrast in audio to show that it is the new day. So if you listen to the difference, and then to the next morning. So here you can, well, you can also see it in audio waveform that the sound of the water is way lower than compared to the previous night. And again, I add some bird sounds that I recorded in the area. So the night before, I just walked into the forest and did a bunch of audio recordings. Well, to really give a contrast to show that it is a new day, and at the same time to convey a little bit more peace, because mornings are usually very peaceful. Just waking up, drinking coffee, having a complete day still ahead of you. And I try to do that with audio here. And if I let you listen to the original audio from this one. So I think one of the hardest part of walking inside a forest is being able to film it in a unique way. It is way easier and way more interesting to film like meadows and views and stuff like that. And that's usually also the thing that people are interested in. When they watch these kind of films, they want to see the grand vistas, they want to see the meadows, the flowers and stuff like that. Well, personally, I just love walking through forests like this, but it's very hard to capture it, very hard to capture it in a unique way every time. So if we look at the entire film, I think, well, let's say 10% of the film shows forest and 90% shows the views. While in reality, it was probably more like 50-50. 50% of the time I would walk through these dense forests, and 50% of the time I would have views like these. So this section is the spray park, which is the section that goes higher than the new Wonderland Trail, but the views are just so much better. So at this footbridge, the trail connects again with the other variant of the Wonderland Trail. And you have some epic views of the Carbon Glacier, which is the lowest glacier in the U.S., I think, or at least in the lower 48 states. So this is probably at like 1,100 meters, like 3,500 feet of elevation, which is extremely low for a glacier. But the thing is that this glacier is probably one of the most stable glaciers in the U.S. So it only retracted maybe 200 meters, 700 feet over the last decade or two. And that's because the glacier is so extremely thick and it is covered in just rubble, which actually isolates the glacier really well, which makes it that this glacier is still shrinking at an extremely low rate. So this was probably one of my favorite sections of the Wonderland Trail. I think it's called Berkeley Park. So it's between the Carbon Glacier, which actually runs behind these trees over here. You can see some dust coming off from the wind, and just before Mystic Lake. But I think the vistas are just exceptional over here. So this is Mystic Lake, and this shot is a special one. So I bring two lenses on longer trips like these, which is my 14 to 140 millimeter, which is a 28 to 280 millimeter equivalent lens, and I bring this 9 millimeter lens. And the reason I bring the 9 millimeter lens over, for example, a 7-14, which is slightly wider and has more capabilities, also with zooming, is because of the weight. This lens is a plastic lens, but it's actually exceptionally sharp and works really well. But it's only like 20% the weight of the bigger lens. So in order to save weight, I bring this lens. But one of the downsides is that I'm sometimes unable to get the wide angle view that I want to show. So what I do is I create my own panorama shots, and I do that by just combining four different shots into one. So the way I do it is that I record four different shots. So showing them one by one, I point my camera at the top left corner, record for 10 seconds without moving or anything. I do the same for the bottom left corner, the top right corner, and then finally I record for 10 seconds, or in this case longer, to create my subject in this shot. And these shots are just normal shots. So I just go from side to side just to record all of them. And then in post, I just stitch them together. So I start with one layer, and then I just add a mask to them. So you can see it's just a nice smooth mask. And I combine them at points where you usually are not able to see that it's not stitching correctly. So in this case, the tree line. Probably if you would look very closely, you can definitely see a bunch of artifacts between the two layers where the trees don't line up, or in this case, the trees all bend to the right, as you can see here. But if you look at it at the big picture, you won't really notice it. And I do the same for this one. In this case, I definitely pay attention to the ridge line over here, make sure that they align properly. And I do the same for this one here. And what you're left with is just a wide angle shot, basically the same as, well, this would probably be a 6 millimeter wide shot, so a 12 millimeter equivalent. But I can do it with a lighter weight lens, and I've done it so many times now that it only takes me a few minutes to record, and then in post it takes me 5 minutes to do it. So definitely worth the weight saving for me. So one thing you might be wondering is why I'm pitching my tent. Well, it's actually just a tarp. So when I got to this campsite, it was full of mosquitoes again. So you can see me spray some bug spray over here. So I was preparing for a mosquito-filled night again. So I pitched my tarp, and I pitched it all the way to the ground to sort of give me a little bit of protection from the mosquitoes at night. But then as the sun started to set, it started to cool down significantly. And within like 1 hour, all the mosquitoes were gone. So by the time I went to bed, I actually preferred just sleeping outside instead of crawling into this tarp that I pitched. So I just slept outside again. So that's why you see the tent and see me sleep here as well. I think I have to wrap it up. I have to catch my flight soon to Taiwan to do another hike. But I hope you found this useful. This was definitely a very fun trip for me. I had a lot of fun just playing around in the snow, and hiking in this beautiful weather with these beautiful landscapes. So let me scroll through it quickly. I think I mentioned most of the important points of this film. So I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you for watching, and talk to you the next time.